Okay, are we? Looks like we're live. Need a retweet from Ethan. Okay, welcome everybody to ETH Vancouver every Thursday here in Vancouver. Thank you for joining this week. We have Zach, our presenter, presenting on some better crypto UX. Yeah, we can just get right into it, I think.
Thanks, Owen. Yep, thanks everyone for coming. And also thanks to Andrew for the invite. I really appreciate it. I'd like to talk today about some less technical aspects of improving the crypto experience for users. Show of hands, who's been in the crypto space for more than 5 years? Most of the people here? Okay. And how did you find the experience back then?
Learning curve.
Learning curve?
Major one.
What was the, anyone in the group, what was the app that you used to enter the crypto space first?
Probably would have been Binance, I think, at the start.
Binance?
Norland, Binance, yeah.
Yeah.
Then we got into having our own custodial wallets on Ethereum, and then went into like making mining rigs and then dabbling around that and Claymore mining and stuff like that, and just went on from there.
Yeah, a lot is being built at the same time as people are figuring out how to make it into a product for people to actually use, right? But I think it's come a long way. So before we get into it, a bit about me. My name's Zach. Recently co-founded a project called Dixari. I'll share a bit more about that later. Before that, I was working at Binance US. I've been working in the crypto industry for about 7 years now. It's also what brought me to Vancouver. And yeah, I guess I'd summarize my motivation of why I like working in this space is I really hate banks. All kinds. Whether they're gambling with taxpayers' money essentially, or if I have to go into the bank and pay a check and it takes me like half an hour to park and then just actually deal with the process of it all, I think we're just so far from a optimal experience when you're dealing with your money nowadays, especially with the tech we have. So I've been to a bunch of talks here, and I think a lot of it focuses on the improvements to the protocols, a lot of dApps in the space, certainly some on the user experience, but I think it's really something that I've been focused on with the work I've been doing, primarily mobile experiences when I was at Binance, for example. And I still think that it's a shame that the majority of people are holding their crypto or their finances in custodial platforms, right, like Binance and Coinbase. The wallets, they've come a long way, but they're still not at the point where people are switching over and finding them that powerful and easy to use. So I think the difference there is the Coinbases, the Binance of the world make things simple, they feel safe, and fast and easy to use. Is anyone familiar with this? Call it out if you know what it is. MetaMask. It's a pretty notorious example of a bad crypto user experience that's repeated by everyone. I think they've made some improvements, to be fair to them, but they're slow, But they're actually the default wallet for a lot of people. How about this one? Anyone know this one? No Solana fans. It's an app called Moonshot. They recently onboarded, well, it was late last year when the Trump coin came out. They onboarded 750,000 new crypto users in a week. So much so that they drained all of MoonPay's liquidity and they had to borrow 100 mil from it was a big bank, I forget who. They also borrowed 60 mil from Ripple. So they ended up having huge user onboarding, and it's because they'd made the experience super simple. You just buy meme coins basically and sell them. So, and I think it's important to note here, these two apps, they have very different real user audiences in my opinion. MetaMask still is a great app for software developers, people building products on chain that need the custom settings, those like advanced RPC settings, and more data available to debug things, and that's still useful, but it's not for everyone's general day-to-day crypto usage. What makes a good UX? I think the first thing is it's so important to understand what user you're building a product for, what their goals are, and what their context is. What do they know? What do they understand? Are they technical or not? Even things like, can they comprehend small fonts versus larger fonts? That comes in with different age groups. And then also preferences. People have preferences for different things. If they're from a younger generation or from an older generation, they may want different styles. So the goal with creating a good UX is to base that around those users that you're building for as real behaviors and not just following trends and assumptions. And then always evolve your product with feedback and iteration until you continually get that great feedback from users that your product's what they need. I mentioned I'm working on a project called Dixari, not to talk too much about it, but I will use it as examples of what we've been trying to do with some of the user experience improvements. So we're building a mobile trading app, which is fully on-chain and self-custodial, and that has a seamless UX that feels like a centralized exchange, like a Binance or a good fintech. But we're powering it with decentralized infra, protocols and apps, all in the back end. So we're just really a front end. This is kind of like a preview of our app. We're in a private beta now, just to give you an idea of what we're kind of building. So one of the main challenges we had when we started to approach this project was how to manage the wallet user experience and private key security. It's always been a challenge with onboarding users to self-custody, is this idea of having to protect your seed phrase, write it down, where do you keep it, what happens if you lose it? And most people get really either frustrated or just so concerned that they don't bother to do it when it comes to this. And so there's a real risk behind that as well. Many people have lost their funds permanently just through user error, basically. And that breaks the user experience down. Particularly when you're going into an app and you have to follow all these steps just to get started, you might not even know what the app does yet when you do that. So our solution was to use embedded wallets, and there are a few companies that have sprung up that provide this as a service. Coinbase are also doing it themselves now. And they make it simpler to create Web 2 friendly or familiar experience that people are used to with emails and social logins as a way to encrypt and secure your private key. The private keys still exist. They're stored securely on the user's mobile device or in a server online, but it's encrypted by, as I mentioned, a method that only that user has access to. Whether that's an email and like a one-time passcode that they have to enter, or more recently, passkeys. Has anyone used a passkey where you just tap it and you use your face? Yeah. So we've been using those, and it's still self-custodial. No other party, our app or the provider turnkey have access to that private key to use it. And there's also built-in recovery. So if, for example, you lost access to that passkey, you'd still be able to use your email to recover it. And at the end of the day, the user still has a choice to export that seed phrase if they really want to. But, that's their choice if they want to take it away. And so this is the experience we've been able to create, is just, one tap, sign in with a face scan, and you're into the wallet. With our project, we're trying to make it a trader-focused app, particularly for pro traders, and users of this kind expect fast trades. They expect the exchange itself to have deep liquidity, and if you've used Binance, you're not having to deal with gas fees and approvals all the time, right? So that's always been the drawback with on-chain trading platforms, and this is the challenge we were looking at with our app: is how do we power the exchange itself without having to build the full exchange that powers it. And at every click that requires an on-chain approval or wait for a block to finalize delays the user's trading experience and makes them not able to compete. So our solution was to use the best on-chain DEX that was already built at the time when we started our project, and that's called Hyperliquid. Has anyone heard of Hyperliquid? Yeah, swear I was at a talk about a year ago and I asked the same question or something, and no, we were doing like a panel. Not many people had heard of Hyperliquid then, so it's definitely grown a lot. It's run its own custom layer 1 blockchain that's built purposely for trading and fast execution. And their experience is, in my opinion, as good, if not better, than a centralized exchange. And so we've really just used that and built a mobile interface around it. That's a preview of it. The next challenge we looked at was this idea of like cross-chain fragmentation, having your assets on many different chains and how you have to bridge across them manually. And for a lot of people in the space, that's a really challenging learning curve. It's also one of the areas where hacks happen a lot, and people have heard like horror stories of hundreds of mil being hacked by North Korea or other bad actors. So it's an area of concern for user experience, but also security. And when you're having to bridge before you do, whatever you're actually intending to do, whether it's to buy an asset, to interact with a certain app, if you're always having to bridge funds in, maybe even previously from your bank to try and get the funds there so you can use it, it's a lot of friction in the first place. And so removing that friction was one of the things that centralized exchanges did really well. When your funds are on a Coinbase or a Binance, they're linking you to the bank account so you can bring funds in, and then you're not having to worry about if the fund's on Ethereum, or any other chain. So I don't think our solution's perfect yet, but one of the solutions we're using for this is to use intents-based bridging. And that is also enabled by this idea of account abstraction. So not just using normal wallets where you have to sign everything as a user manually, but essentially using a wallet that operates as though it's a smart contract and can have some pre-approved intent submitted to a network that the network can authorize with your approval. And that can allow a lot of different use cases, but one of the ones it's allowing us to do is to bridge funds across chains almost effectively instantly. And another thing is that it kind of abstracts away the need to have a gas token as well. So previously you would always need to have ETH in your account to then be able to send any kind of token. But with this, that's actually not the case. Is anyone familiar with this concept or understand how it works? Yeah? Okay, so in practice, all the user really sees is the screen they're inputting the amount. We abstract away what network the tokens are on. In fact, in this case with USDC, if you have USDC on multiple chains, we can combine it all in one transaction and transfer it to the destination chain in one go. So the goal is for users to not have to worry about what network their assets are. Finally, just a challenge that I think many projects of our nature have to deal with, but it's something that centralized exchanges have excelled on, is connectivity with fiat on and off ramps, right? So if that's for Canada, being able to move your funds into stable coins or crypto to get it out and then use different platforms, that's been a challenging experience. Just curious in the room, what on-ramping methods do you guys tend to use, if you're willing to share?
Just buying on Kraken or
Buying on Kraken?
DAX or
For like a centralized, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have to transfer it to your wallet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then bridge it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the same. And off-ramping is often harder, I find. At least in my experience, I've been in the UK and then here.
Yeah. I usually just off ramp that way. I don't really on ramp that much, but yeah.
Yeah. So for us, you know, we're still a self-custodial project. We want the user to end up with crypto in their wallet. We don't want it sitting in a bank account ever. So we're partnering a few guys. But our solution is that we have to aggregate a bunch of different providers, because some may operate in the US, in Canada, but then there's Asia, there's so many different places. And so we'll find that with a lot of front ends building experiences in crypto, there's a lot of aggregation going on behind the scenes of different sources of liquidity. That's the same for swaps as it is for on and off ramps. We're using MoonPay. They powered Moonshot, and that was that experience that I mentioned brought on tons of users with the Trump meme coin. They're great. They have high fees, but the experience is super slick. Like, it's done in 4 steps, and it's instant. Iron are, for me, pretty interesting. They're allowing you to create a virtual bank account where you can just copy and like wire account details, and you can wire large sums, like over $100,000 with low fees. And then they're sourcing liquidity on that their end to swap that to USDC and deliver it to your wallet instantly. So you know, it's like idea funds go into escrow and then release the stable coins, which is minted 1-to-1 in a kind of short space of time. And that for me is an interesting way that we can allow the user experience of people bringing large amounts on-ramped and off-ramped, which hasn't been possible except for on centralized exchanges for a long time. And then on-ramper, they basically aggregate all of the other providers for like every country that you can imagine. So whether it's GrabPay in like Southeast Asia or some of the more obscure ones in Latin America. Yeah, and again, we're just trying to abstract it as much as possible. It's a balance between giving users transparency, but then simplifying that we're trying to reach. So summarize what worked, what didn't of all these challenges. Hyperliquid's been super fast and intuitive. The turnkey flow now, it's actually going live to our users on next Tuesday. It's been super fast. The performance has improved. We had originally been using a Web3 auth MPC, which, is anyone here familiar with MPC, I imagine? Few nods. It's a form of self-custody where you're sharding your private key into, say, 3 pieces. And for any transaction signing, you need, say, 2 out of the 3 pieces. And then usually the pieces are stored in different locations, maybe 1 on your device, 1 on server, and 1 in a different server. The problem with that was the signing was too slow. So that didn't work for trading, so we've moved away from that. And then with the bridging, the sort of issue we're dealing with is that liquidity is sometimes not available for some of the longer tail assets, like when you get beyond, say, USDC and ETH. So I think that's an area where that space needs to kind of grow and develop, is to have deeper liquidity. Yeah, so my closing thoughts are that UX is the key to real crypto adoption, even abstracted so that people don't realize what they're using is powered by blockchain technology. So, you know, I think this is just one approach we're taking to build an app, but there's certainly more ways to improve experience. I'd love to hear from the group here. Any questions or things people would like to share about their experience?
When is Stexari available to try more broadly?
Yeah, we have a beta, which it's in private beta right now. We should be launching in the app stores pretty soon. So if you'd like to try out, feel free to just chat with me after.
Thank you.
Hey, Zach, thanks for the presentation. I think when it comes to UX, you're on point about saying like building something for like real user behavior, but a lot of these technologies like account abstraction or bridging the way that you're doing it, like it's fairly novel, new, and like cutting edge. So like users don't really have a behavior. How do you? I guess the question is, how do you get like user feedback, like good user feedback, when you're like also kind of innovating on these technologies?
I mean, my personal approach has been that I was working without these limitations when I was working on a centralized platform, right? And we were designing and building apps, and like honestly, I think Binance's user experience is not that great. We were trying to work on some areas of it. So trying to imagine what would you do if you had no limitations and could design the best user experience, and then trying to find the technologies that can make it happen, and then you sometimes realize, okay, it can't happen right now. There's a gap in the space for some solution. And I think that's how a lot of these companies like Turnkey, MoonPay, those that I mentioned sprung up, because they realized, oh, there's a problem here that needs solving. And it's an aggregation of many different solutions that end up with the whole product working and creating a good user experience.
Well, thanks.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it. I guess if this is an open discussion, I just wanted to maybe talk about Superform a little bit, because we're doing a lot of the stuff that you're talking about here. Like we had like a first version of the product, which is just making it really easy to access like investment products, vaults on chain, and but it was still like a desktop experience where I have to log in with my wallet and I have to have my private key, and I'm signing transactions and I need gas on different chains, and it's like we abstracted away a lot of stuff. Like you could go from any with some limitations, any asset on any chain into any vault on any chain, but it was still like the average person can't really access that. So in our V2, a big focus is on like the UX. So we're gonna have like fiat onboarding, like you have, or so basically from Apple Pay or Google or your bank account, you go right into a vault all in one go. We're gonna do pass keys and Face ID, Touch ID. What was it like? You talked about having combining like your USDC across like different chains, like fund one deposit, same kind of thing. So I don't know exactly where I'm going with this. Just want to share, like
Cool.
we're like all this stuff you're talking about in this presentation. Like we're employing this as well in an app.
Yeah, I'm like glad that more people. I mean, I know other teams are working on similar things. It's just for me, after quite a number of years, not been in it as long as some people, but it felt like the user experience was still not improving for so long. I don't know if you guys felt that way. I feel like now, finally, hopefully, there's going to be better apps there.
I feel like Rabby is obviously a step up. Is this on? Yeah. Rabby is obviously a step up from MetaMask, but that took like 5 years, and it's still not getting rid of the major pain points like the gas on multiple chains and like things like that. And so I think you're right. I think it really did start slowly, the improvements over time, but with examples like both of what you mentioned, it seems like it's ramping up quickly, and like a lot of these technologies that you speak of like really didn't exist as well 5 years ago, like how to do MPC distributed in like a way for just regular users instead of just like institutions, or whatever this iron is thing sounds really interesting and not available. So it sounds like all the pieces are now really here to be able to make these more useful applications.
There are a lot more pieces now, but I still think there's some left to build, and that's probably going to happen quicker, I assume now. Yeah, I think Rabby is an example of a wallet that definitely improved on what MetaMask has. And it's more general purpose, right? You can use that wallet for anything. It's not like our app where we're trying to build in certain use cases that are directly in the interface. So I find it's also something to consider with the user experience. Is someone coming to you to solve a specific problem, or are they coming to you to find out what's possible out there? Is it something they want to discover, or they already know what their intention is and they're going to try to get it done as easily as possible? Which comes back to this point I was making, is understanding what your users are actually using your product for.
And I think at the end of the day, like these apps like Rabby or MetaMask that provide more, ultimately, like you can kind of dig into them and get more detail that's like usually foreign to the average person, like that is great for power users. And the notion of like if we're actually gonna, everyone's always talking, when's retail gonna come? When's retail gonna come? And it's like you can't really expand the pie. Like the users of these wallets, I think, are very much kind of hit their limits, and now newer wallets are just enabling a different kind of behavior on chain with newer people.
Yeah.
And also people who want both experiences, but.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, everyone that's using the legacy financial system, I'll call it, they're still dealing with tons of friction, right? So there's got to be a way to get them on board. And I think it's just not creating the too alien of an experience. They're familiar with something, but let's make it better. It's like when you switch from ordering a cab to just calling an Uber, that was easier, right? Not necessarily simpler, but easier.
I think the app's awesome, by
thanks.
the way. But I was just curious how you're dealing with the account abstracted, I guess like login if it goes through email. I'm wondering, like, while that does make it easier for the users to access their wallet, what are you doing to mitigate like the security risk of that?
Yeah, so for the email login, we're also layering on top passkeys. They'll use that as their primary login. But if the email was ever compromised, there's also a on-device like biometric face scan that happens when you log in. So you'd have to get hold of the user's device and their email, and then also if they've enabled that, like have their face there. So our argument is that's as secure as any kind of financial security solution. One thing we want to add on top of that is some additional MFAs should the user wish, perhaps with some spending limits. So maybe like an authenticator code app-based MFA or something like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Just so I understand correctly, I'm not super familiar with how passkey or like how some of these more recent solutions for social sign-in work, but where is the seed stored? Is it on the user's device as protected by the the passkey and the email and stuff like that? But it's always on their device and not on the provider's device or servers?
Yeah, so say, for example, with an iPhone, you have storage on your iPhone, and then you have an extra secure storage module, which
enclave.
is a secure enclave, it's called. That's actually where the private key data is stored. And it's never the case that data comes out and is exposed to the rest of the device when you're signing something. There's like a message sent in, signed locally in that module, and then sent out with the signature applied.
Sweet, thanks.
And that's, again, secured by that passkey biometric authentication to know it. So they know it knows it's a person that created it,
Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the account abstraction part? 2 years ago, when I first came out with like the 4.4 whatever EIP ERC 4337, they said that like we could do without private keys. Like this solves private keys. Are we there yet? Are we getting there?
Does it solve private keys? I mean, inherently there's still in the wallet generation process, you're generating a private key, right? And deriving, I think, the seed phrase derives the private key, which derives the public key. But does the user need to ever see that piece of data? Not anymore, I don't think. Especially with some of the solutions I've described. There's always going to be hardcore people that want to have it engraved in a metal sheet, split into 5 pieces and buried in the different corners of the world. And that's fine, they can do that. But for most people, they don't care what that piece of data is, if it's 24 words or a 65, digit alphanumeric. I think the abstraction that this enables is more so that you don't have to always be signing with the private key every transaction. There's some level of abstraction there where you can set some approvals and things can happen asynchronously. You can even have sessions where you're authorizing for the signature to be valid. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
There's one more thing I've noticed, that UX usually plays catch up with what protocol is doing. For example, every new upgrade in the protocol brings with like a new UX EIP, like account abstraction. Recently with Pectra, there were like few EIPs where you can like make the UX better, and then UX have to catch up and implement those things always.
Yeah.
Which is unlike what you can do in like a centralized company where you have all the liberty to make your schema or do whatever you want. Like here, everyone's trying to find one global maximum of the UX, which kind of should work for everyone. But like, if you work for like a different like a centralized company, they can just figure out the best way they want to figure out their UX, right? Like they have to work for the global maximum of everyone else.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the first thing's like for sure the development cycle and the adoption is slow because you have to wait for every major upgrade to make the UX better. Like
To an extent, yeah. I mean, we're even facing that because we're integrated with a Hyper EVM blockchain, but they haven't yet upgraded with Pectra, and there's some other stuff. It does create challenges. I think, not most users aren't going to make decisions like, I want to be on that blockchain with doing this thing. They're going to make choices like, I want to use the app. And the app has to solve the problem of, okay, this user may not already have assets on this chain that I'm built on. And I think that's how you have to look at it. Even for us, we're not going to have every chain with a certain thing built on that the user needs to always be available to them. The core use case we're solving for now is to be able to trade, and that's on the Hyperliquid blockchain, and we've had to figure out certain user experience challenges around that, but not necessarily like, say, Solana. We're not doing anything with that currently. But yeah, there's like always different paces at which each ecosystem or team is developing, and it's a lot of stuff stitched together often. But I find that's better than with a centralized platform where there's a lot of like legacy debt and you're stuck with a lot of things. When you're building with all of these different apps and protocols that are decentralized, you can switch things in and out and plug and play in a much more flexible way, I've found. Bit of a rock concert starting now. Cool. Well, we should wrap up maybe then. If you do want to get in touch with me, this is my handle, and come chat with me after if you want.
Thanks, Zach. Great presentation.
Thank you, everyone.